Thanks, Rosa. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Skidmore. I'm the director of the NCRCRD, and thank you for joining the webinar. We have Deborah Tootle and Jerry Bratz doing the webinar, and the title of the webinar is Leading Communities, Development of a Place-Based Leadership Program. So let me just take a moment and introduce Deborah and Jerry. Deborah is an associate professor of sociology at Iowa State University and a community leadership specialist for Iowa State University and the University of Wisconsin Extension. Jerry Bratz is an associate professor of community resource development with UW Extension, and he's worked both in rural and urban programs and outreach for a number of years. So, and as I visit the states in my new role as director, something that keeps popping up as an issue is leadership, and sometimes the word is succession planning, not just for farms, but businesses and community leaders as the current leaders get older, and there seems to be a gap with people coming in and taking on those roles. So I think this is a very important issue for our entire region. So I think I will hand it over to Deborah and Jerry, and thanks again to both of you for doing the webinar.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here, and thank you all for participating. The first thing we want to do is we want to acknowledge our support from NCRCRD and the USDA for the support they have given us in this project. We wouldn't have been able to do this without your help, so thank you all very much. Basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to start and talk a little bit about the purpose and the rationale of this project, and I think Mark gave us a really good introduction into that. We'll talk a little bit about some of the literature on community development and the related fields that's going to help us understand what's going on. We'll talk about how we gathered some data that we have used in this report. We'll talk about the actual curriculum development and then move into some conclusions and recommendations that we have come to. Like I said, Mark really talked about the needs for community leadership. And the only thing that I feel like we would really need to add to that is that we also know that we're in a situation of declining social capital and declining community engagement. And that's going to be really important to keep that idea of community engagement in mind as we move forward with this. And we're seeing fewer efforts on place-based leadership, even though the social science research that's out there is talking to or telling us about the importance of more place-based and shared leadership. And we just haven't quite got to that point in our programming efforts. Just to give you a little bit of background, because I know sometimes people question why Extension is doing work in community and organizational leadership, but if we go back to the late 40s after World War II, we will see that is an issue that came up as one of the areas that became a mandate for cooperative extension. More recently, since the 80s, we have seen people, extension educators and some academicians questioning the fact that we seem to be losing a lot of the research base for the work that has actually come out of the North Central region. And I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Thanks, Deborah. Well, we focused on Iowa and Wisconsin in a partnership on this community leadership development project, and why we engaged both states was because there were a good number of similarities. Just a couple to mention, both Wisconsin and Iowa have a large agricultural base. We also have a large manufacturing base in common. We have large rural areas. We have medium-sized cities that are dispersed across both states that are regional centers. Iowa has 9 cities between 50,000 and 100,000 population, and Wisconsin has a dozen cities between 50,000 and 100,000 populations, and they're all dispersed regionally across the state. And we also have smaller cities that are dispersed as well across the state. So geographically, there were some similarities. And we also identified this demand for community-based leadership in both states, this leadership programming, not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. And then both states are in a unique situation where Deborah Tootle is our leadership development specialist, working for both Iowa State Extension and University of Wisconsin Extension. So we have that linkage across both states as well.
Thanks, Jerry. What we had proposed to do in this project, and I will tell you that things didn't always go as we thought they would, but that was part of the learning process. We wanted to develop a research-based curriculum on place-based leadership. And this process would take us through a review of the relevant literature, and it would also include a critical assessment of the existing leadership programs in both states and the impacts of these programs. And we also, when we started talking about putting together a curriculum, we wanted a curriculum that would be modular so that it could be tailored to the needs of very diverse communities, because we've got not just rural communities, but most of us are also working in urban communities. And we also know that one size does not fit all. But at the same time, we feel like there's some core competencies that we need to be able to cover. We also wanted to be able to start incorporating principles of adult learning, as well as both synchronous and asynchronous learning methods and multimedia content into our programming. And more importantly, we wanted to be able to engage the community development specialists and the educators from both states in this project, because we know we can't go out there and assess their needs without involving them in the process. So what we're going to talk about just briefly today, we just wanted to give you a few bits of some of the relevant literature that we found out there. And we're going to go through, we'll talk a little bit about the leadership continuum and leadership paradigms, how community capitals research played into this. We'll touch on a little bit of the recent empirical work. We'll talk a little bit about evaluation and where it's going in leadership programs, and maybe some new directions for us to take. And so we're going to start to give you sort of a framework of where we're going. We're going to start talking a little bit about how Ken Wilkinson, who has done a lot of work on rural communities, talked about what community leadership was. First of all, you need to know that he refers to a community as a place where there's a lot of social interaction going on. So how he defines community leadership is it's the capacity to bring the local people together so that they can start addressing common issues and problems. So he's not talking about leaders, but he's talking about leadership. But at the same time, he warns us that leadership education programs, if we're not careful, may contribute more to individual development than community development. And he points out that if we want to have community development, we really need to be able to focus on those skills that are needed to build community structure. So I don't know how many of you all on this call, I see that most of you are in Extension, ever had an opportunity to work with Janet Ayers at Purdue. If you have worked with Janet, you know that she spent a lot of time on leadership development, and she identified 4 different levels of leadership development, starting with personal leadership, going up to interpersonal leadership, up to organizational leadership, and finally up to community leadership. And she had this progression of leadership, and she also identified specific skills that were associated with each one of these levels of leadership. And when you're looking at organizational and community-based leadership, Janet told us that we had to really focus a lot on group processes. What we're seeing right now, and this is also what Janet had seen, is that most of our community leadership programs are still focusing a lot on personal and interpersonal development. And she always believed that we are going to help communities with their community development. We need to focus more on organizational and community development skills, a lot of community process skills. Another piece that's important in this big picture is to understand how our views, how our paradigms of leadership are shifting. And if you go back to the early part of the 1900s, you will know that we believe that leaders were born. They weren't made, they were born. And we've progressed through that. I think most people are still in the era of thinking about transactional and transformational leadership. But really, if we're talking about engaged communities and community processes, again, we need to move away from that individual perspective and move more to a community perspective and the idea of shared leadership. In other words, you can have a lot of people participating in that leadership process. It's not just one or two people. This is about being inclusive. So then we start looking at some of the literature on social and community capitals, and we see how that fits into this whole picture of where community leadership is, because we know that if we're looking at community leadership, we can increase community engagement, which is going to contribute to social and other types of community capitals, and eventually get us to the point where we want to be talking about in terms of community resilience. So when we went from some of that related work and tried to dig down into some of the work, some of the recent empirical work on community leadership, we found, just as Ken Pigg and his colleagues have found, that it's really understudied. There isn't a lot of work, recent empirical work on community leadership out there. But what I want to do is, I don't know how many of you all have seen this book. It just came out in 2015. This was something that Ken Pigg and his colleagues have done. And they did a very thorough assessment of community leadership programs across 6 states. And some of the things that they found in this process really helped us understand what we were seeing. One, they talked about how community leadership development effects on communities are measurable. That's really important for us. And they found that community leadership development is linked to community change. Community change is related to civic engagement. It's also related to shared leadership. They also stressed that our community leadership culture needs to be able to shift and adapt so that we're dealing with the more long-term and complex issues that our communities are facing these days. And they finally argued that community leadership development programs need to change to support the change in the community leadership culture. We found this very enlightening and very helpful as we went through this process. We also wanted to talk a little bit about evaluation and some of the new approaches. As Jerry mentioned earlier, a lot of community leadership development and leadership development programs in general are struggling to evaluate what's going on. It's very difficult to gather some of the impacts. We're going to suggest that leadership programming efforts include something like ripple effect mapping, Ripple effects mapping is a very visual facilitation process that helps you link activities in different projects and the people that are involved in them. It's very useful. Social network analysis, on the other hand, is probably a much more complex than doing ripple effects mapping. But if we're talking about social capital and social relationships and social networks that we hope to be building through community leadership, it is probably one of the best ways for us to be able to assess those impacts. So I would like to turn it over to Jerry again.
So next we focused on our methodology for conducting this project. And our goal was to assess community leadership programs in both Iowa and Wisconsin. We planned to have focus groups, so we would have a group interview so they were able to share ideas and have a group discussion to spur additional ideas and reflections on their participation in their community leadership program. We also engaged coordinators of leadership programs in an online survey focused on some key informant interviews, some qualitative observation, and also documented previous studies that focused on community leadership development. Deborah took the lead on the literature review and the curriculum development, and she also was able to pilot it as we worked through this project. And then I focused on data collection and analysis. We did have some challenges with the focus groups as they were difficult to organize and get participants around the table. A couple of the challenges were that the leadership programs that we connected with in both states had lost contact with previous participants. And we also had county extension staff turnover issues. So those past relationships weren't as strong as we anticipated. So again, that really focused on how important local presence is. Local presence with a county-based educator is critical in building relationships and trust with participants, so that follow-up mentoring and coaching piece after they participate in the leadership program is aligned throughout. I did an online survey of past leadership programs in Wisconsin, again, mainly through our extension network, and that included both community development educators and 4-H and youth development educators that responded. And then we used, again, key informants, observations, and document study to gather additional data in our methodology process. And I personally conducted 2 focus groups in 2 Iowa communities that were communities that had populations between 5,000 and 6,000. So they were smaller communities. They were both county seats. And I wanted to learn why the urgency to develop a leadership program. And really their urgency to do this was that new leadership was needed in the community. The communities had 20 to 33% of the population that was 65 and over, and was critical for long-term community sustainability to engage younger residents in leadership opportunities in the community. What participants liked most about the program was interactive group activities. They didn't care for lecture at all. Lecture style was ineffective. They wanted interactive group activities so they could learn in a group and better understand each other's strengths, and that was critical. And they also enjoyed learning new individual skills as well that they could use in a collective effort. What they disliked was that they felt that the programs they participated in had too much information in these trainings, and then from their perspective, based on their local situation, they want more training on growing diversity in their communities. And then we asked if they felt that the leadership program focused on individual skills, community-based skills, or both, and they felt that they had a good alignment focusing on both. The most difficult part of their engagement in the leadership program was the follow-up afterwards to really anchor what they learned and make it stick. They felt that after the program was over, there was a necessity for more follow-up with mentoring and coaching to really help them enhance their skill sets with what they learned and make that stick. That was their biggest difficulty. Again, they like the group activities that create more social relationships, help them understand each other better, and learn each other's strengths as well, which they felt was crucial moving forward. Desired end products in their mind were enhanced networks, increasing knowledge of existing community issues and future issues on the horizon, and again, opportunity for more civic engagement and knowledge of what resources were in the community and how they could tap into those resources collectively. What was missing in their program, again, getting back to the issue of putting what they learned into action and making it stick, more emphasis on follow-up, mentoring, and coaching after they had participated in the program. Impacts on the community, they voiced both individual and community impacts. For example, elected to the chamber board, greater community volunteerism across the community as a result of this leadership program, so they're engaging more citizens. And then one example was that the community addressed the need by creating a community food security program as a result of numerous individuals participating in the leadership program. Key survey findings were we found that majority of the programs focused on both issues and skills. Programs engaged a wide range of community members, from elected officials, business leaders, government staff, nonprofit leaders, young professionals, community volunteers, and several programs also engaged youth. We found that the program time frame for beginning to completion was 4 to 10 months, so there's quite a significant time frame involved here, quite a commitment. It's just not a 1 or 2 session program, but it extend engage with this because it is a longer term teaching program. Participants that participated, there were equal numbers of men and women engaged. Evaluation focused on surveys, pre-post evaluations, measurement of what participants did after they completed the program and how they participated and participated in community. And then one program in Southwest Wisconsin had a 10-year and a 15-year evaluation where they had stayed connected with the participants over the years and did a really extensive 10-year and 15-year evaluation, which was one of the unique pieces of evaluation we found as we went through collecting data on this project. Other findings, we found that whether it's leadership development programs or community leadership development programs, this is a very popular topic at this time. There's a lot of demand and need for it in communities, whether it be rural or urban. It's spanning across all extension program areas, including youth development as well. Within community development, there's a mix of both leadership development and community leadership development programming. One concern we had is that these programs seem somewhat dated and they're not linked to current research as we felt they should be, so that's one we were addressing as we worked through this project. And there's less focus on core competencies and community engagement, the social cohesion, developing social networks and shared leadership. There's less focus on that. There's more focus on individual leadership. So those are just some of the key findings. And then to wrap up on key findings, there was a difficulty in measuring community impacts. Every single program was different. It seemed that there was not a lot of cohesion in the program. Again, we already mentioned that there was concern about lack of it being research-based with current research. We really found most collective impact by reviewing recording results. We report as extension to our federal USDA partner. By looking through those results narratives, we were able to identify some impressive recorded impacts through those impact statements. Again, that really showed that despite some challenges, there's some leadership programs out there that are doing a great job recording impacts. Again, a good model, as mentioned previously, was the Community Leadership Alliance in Southwest Wisconsin, which has both a 10-year evaluation and a 15-year evaluation.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm going to talk a little bit about the curriculum development, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we want to have some time for you all to ask some questions. We identified from the literature 4 major competency areas for community leadership development. And the first one was community leadership principles. What is community leadership as opposed to individual leadership? What is your community knowledge? What's going on in your community? The second one was identifying issues and framing ideas. The third was building social relationships and social capital. And finally, the last competency area was mobilizing resources for community action. We developed this draft program. We have piloted it one time in Iowa. We plan on piloting it again in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and Kossuth County, Iowa in 2017. And as we're going through this process, we're evaluating. We're doing short, medium, and long-term evaluations with the hopes that once we finish this, we can go back and revise the curriculum that we have put together. Very quickly, I will tell you about the 4 modules. They correspond with the 4 areas of you see on the slides. I'm not going to read through them, but the critical skills that we covered in each one of these. The first module is on community leadership development and community knowledge. The second is on identifying issues and framing ideas. The third is on building social relationships, building social capital. The fourth one is mobilizing resources for community action. And I know I went through those quickly, but we can send you a copy of the PowerPoint if you would like to see this in more detail. And our conclusions and recommendations as we're starting to move forward, everyone needs to recognize that all leadership programs, whether they're leadership development or community leadership development, have value. And the decision of a community on whether they want to focus on leadership development or community leadership development depends on what their goals are. But we do know that if we're going to have an impact on community development processes, we need to move beyond just creating leaders and moving up to more of the community leadership development programs where we are engaging community. I mean, we're really talking more about community leadership and engagement programs. And we also need to be able to move beyond the dated programs we have. We need to start bringing in more of the current research so we know what's going on and that we can do a better job of bringing in those community skills that are necessary for community development. We think it's very important that our community leadership programming reconnects with the body of research that's out there. There is some community leadership research out there. In particular, there are some older programs that are just gems, and they've been pretty much forgotten over the years. Those are really good to go back to. But we also know that we have some related fields that inform community leadership development, and this is where we need to be working together. This is where research and outreach need to join together and bring these processes together. We would like to see more focus on impact assessments. We'd like to see more leadership efforts include some ripple effects mapping, and we're hoping that some get to the point where they can start moving into social network analysis. We really hope that we can do that as well. Jerry.
Yes, we'd also like to see a more research systematic approach. With Extension, we have a great opportunity here to connect state specialists and local educators in these leadership programs where the specialists play the key research role and the local educator plays the key role in really connecting with the participants in these communities, building that level of trust and engaging these participants with that local presence, and then also providing the follow-up coaching and mentoring after the program as well. Again, we recognize that through this project there's many leadership development programs, but there's very few community leadership development programs. So our challenge is how do we get more community leadership development programs implemented in our communities, and we feel that Extension can be an important niche in that, especially with our specialist and local educator support system. And again, just concluding, our next steps are that we're going to continue efforts on community leadership development programming through the pilot curriculum that was developed. We'll continue to pilot that curriculum in several other communities, both in urban and rural areas. And we're continuing this partnership across state lines with Iowa and Wisconsin. And Deborah's been working on a repository of the community leadership development curricula that's already out there and compiling that. And we appreciate you being a part of this today. And we hope that you'll provide us with feedback and assistance as well as we continue on this journey. And we'd like to thank you, and we have our contacts there as well, our email contacts if you do have any further questions after this program.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I would like to encourage you all to ask us some questions. We would really like to be able to stay in touch with you all because we know that the vast majority of you all on this webinar today are doing some work in leadership, and we would really like to be able to have some kind of multi-state activity where we can work together and start taking this idea of community leadership further. I know I've talked to a few of you all ahead of this program, and I know there's some of you that are interested in continued participation, and we would really welcome that. And if you're interested in participating, why don't you just type in your name on the chat box, and we'll have a record of that. I see so far that you all have asked for copies of the PowerPoints. We will make that available. And yes, we do have some suggestions on readings, and what we'll do on the PowerPoint is we will attach a list of our references. And they're going so fast I can't read them right now. But there's a couple.
Well, I'll back up. I'll try to back up here.
Okay, great, great. There's a couple of questions in here about continued coaching, follow-up after the leadership programs, and we think this is so important. I don't know how many of you all have been involved in the SET programs, the Stronger Economies Together. We think this is a good model, at least at the different state levels, for community leadership programming, where you have somebody like the state specialist who is helping with bringing in the research and maybe through the evaluation process and some of the curriculum development, but that you also have the local educators who are working with the communities that have gone through so that they can continue the coaching process. We think that continued contact, and as Jerry had mentioned to you, is absolutely critical as we move forward. Because what has happened in so many cases that educators have lost contact with the people who have taken these programs, and it's very difficult. We understand that. So we're interested in your thoughts about how to continue that contact and that coaching process.
Well, thank you, Jerry and Deborah, for the presentation. We have a lot of comments and questions and inquiries, so that's just really fantastic. I hate to take time with my own questions. Are there any other, I know that we're a little bit past time. People are still online, and you can see the summary evaluation. I encourage you to fill that out and give us a feedback. So that'd be great for the participants. Did you feel like you were able to get a handle on all of the questions, Deborah and Jerry?
No, Holly's question to me, this is a very interesting question, Holly, and it is something we have struggled with for a number of years of working outside of Extension. We really like the idea of partnering, but we're not sure what's a really good way of doing that and still having some, I don't want to say control over the process, but we want to make sure that the educational process is consistent. So I'd love to hear what you all have to say about this. And all of these questions, and we've got your email, we may just want to try to get in touch with you all afterwards and maybe have a conference call or just some online discussion about some of these issues, because you all are bringing up very good issues.
And I would just follow up on that. The issue we had in Wisconsin is we had numerous leadership programs, but when we reviewed them, we were having a hard time identifying if they were research-based or not. So we felt with the extension-based approach that we would really keep tied to the research and the evidence, and that would really help us enhance our niche as well. That's a big problem with the programs we've found in Wisconsin.
Well, the NCRCRD has Zoom capabilities, so if it turns out that you would like to have another discussion in that format, we are happy to host that if that's helpful.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. I think we're going to be taking you up on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, good. Well, thank you again for the great presentation, and thanks for all the participants and the questions and interaction here. I think we're about out of time, so maybe now is a good time to close up, and hope all of you have a great evening. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.